Today. This is our postponed International Women's Day event from earlier in March that we had to postpone due to the weather. So you may have seen it on the internet, perhaps in the news or the internet, that NAB's theme for International Women's Day was Press for Progress, backing bold women with purpose. In this video, we're going to see, it's very short, here are some of our people talking about what this means to them in terms of their own experiences. Do we have to call Mike? What do we have to do? Pause. Pause for effect, and we just need Mike to press the play button from.
The starting point is always, well, what's important to you personally? So what are your values? What's important to you? What makes you feel alive? Whether that's what you do day to day at work or how you work.
Be really clear about what you want to achieve. Reflect and learn in those moments that maybe you've fallen short, but always celebrate your successes.
Women thinking that they need to mimic men or mimic other successful women in order to be successful, and that just doesn't work. We have to be authentic to ourselves, to our values and to our purpose.
So I have teenage sons and a teenage daughter, and I would like to think that they've provided with the same opportunities throughout their careers. What I want to make sure is that both are treated equally for who they are, for the skills, the capabilities and the experiences that they have. And I think to be able to do that, we as leaders in organisations like NAB need to make sure that we back bold women and we can make sure that they are provided with those opportunities.
Any woman that's in a senior role, in a bank like NAB or any financial services organisation, she's bold to be where she is. I mean, it's not easy to get into those senior positions, and I always admire those women and think, wow, you've probably got 1,000 things going through your mind at any given point in time. You're probably worrying about everyone in the world except yourself. How is it that you've been able to get yourself there?
Madeleine Albright said something that really resounds with me, and that is, there is a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. And in Madeleine's autobiography, she talks a lot about the obstacles that she faced with women, and I've experienced that in my life. And one of the things that I've tried not to do, now that I've reached a senior position, is to, what I try and do is to support men and women equally.
The advice I would give to both my daughter and women in general is to be who you are. To be yourself, to be confident, and to be able to show your real skills, your real personality, and to demonstrate that you can do the job just as well as any man can.
My overwhelming piece of advice to women is be bold, back yourself.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm pleased to introduce today Karen Gourgey, who is the director of the Computer Center for Visually Impaired People at Baruch College. Blind since birth, Dr. Gourgey is now one of the most highly regarded experts on accessibility issues in the country for the visually impaired and sighted alike. As director of CCVIP since 1983, Dr. Gourgey has enabled the training of hundreds of blind and visually impaired people to become competent computer users and has promoted assistive technology to help those around the world. As a founder and the chair of PASS, Pedestrians for Accessible and Safe Streets, a coalition of agencies and consumer groups, she was instrumental in getting the first law passed in New York City to install accessible pedestrian signals throughout the city. Dr. Gourgey has also spearheaded the creation of raised line, large print maps for blind and visually impaired subway and bus travelers, developed a talking kiosk in transit facilities, and co-invented the talking tactile tablet, twister, for which she and co-inventor Stephen Landau were jointly awarded the first annual Louis Braille Touch of Genius Award from National Braille Press. She has also served on the Governor's Executive Board of the New York State Commission for the Blind and Visually Handicapped since 2007. Dr. Gourgey is a graduate of Teachers College, Columbia University, where she received a doctorate in special education. Dr. Gourgey will now share her journey with us and show how she has progressed to where she is today. Please join me in welcoming Karen Gourgey.
Give us a second to ask Madam Ginger to. There you go. Morning, everyone. Morning. So you all can hear fine?
Yes.
Okay. If that turns out not to be true at some point while we're doing this, please don't raise your hand because you know what, we'll be sitting here all day. So, wow, I don't know that. How'd you do that? How'd she get that intro? Anyway, it's mostly all true. No, it is pretty much true. Except it's a funny thing to say that the talking tactile tablet has now been, there are other things that have been invented that in a certain way have superseded it. But it's all about progress, and it's all about things moving forward in terms of accessible technology. So Meredith asked me to share my journey, and I love those folks on the video, and I love your theme of boldness. I was thinking about and trying to prepare for this. I was told by Meredith and my colleague Julie Jansen, who actually put us together, you should talk about how you became a leader. I'm like, huh, okay, fine. Let's think about that one, if it's indeed the case. So I decided it would be fascinating to look up the definition of a leader. So, I asked the guru of all words, I asked Alexa. And Alexa's definition, it's good she's not here, right? Her definition was someone who rules, who guides, who inspires. Well, I know I've never ruled anyone, I can tell you that, and my staff can certainly tell you that. But, guide maybe sometimes and inspire maybe sometimes. So it was sort of interesting to think a little bit about what things have contributed to helping me and would probably contribute maybe to helping other people as you're going along and moving toward what might end up being a leadership role. And so you end up going back to your childhood. I am, as Meredith said, I'm blind from birth, and that will be a part of this conversation today. And then you'll do your own little transmutation of that to whatever it will mean for you and how you came through the world to get where you are at this moment. But one thing is that I was the middle kid of 6. And so one thing I think that helped right from the start is that I had to figure out how I was going to find my place in the middle of those guys, all of whom could see and all of whom we're all interested as kids growing up in, getting first to the food or getting first to dad's attention or mom's attention or whatever, or the TV and which channel I want to watch. No, I don't care. You want to watch that channel too bad. So there's work that started happening when I was a kid in terms of just finding that place. Another thing that I think helped, and I've thought about this a lot, is the fact that my dad, he worked for GE for the whole 35 years of his working life, and he was in sales. So, and prior to that, he met my mom acting on the radio, so he could talk. They both could talk, and he could sell. And I remember at age 22, I think, when I came to New York City after going to school in Ohio at Oberlin College, and I came to New York City and I wanted to join a health club. And the people at this particular health club, which still exists, so I'll be kind and I won't mention their name, were basically, you can't do that. We can't be responsible. You can't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I talked with them and talked with them and talked with them. And finally, when we persuaded them that this was the needed and proper thing to do to let me in, this woman said to me, "Are you in sales?" And I thanked my dad at that point, because just there's so many times when you have to explain things to people or explain your point of view or be able to make moves that will help you to move forward, and you better be able to do it in some way that that people will understand. And then there were other kinds of things. I was very fortunate, and I love that we're talking about International Women's Day, or we're actually doing it again. This is excellent. This makes this bank quite unique that we're having 2 of them in March. The world should know. But I was very blessed in that I had teachers who were women and who were very encouraging, challenging and encouraging. I had a 6th grade teacher, so I was like 11, which was in 1843. And she was going to be out one day, and she told me that I was going to be the teacher for the day that she was out. And she actually gave me, and my itinerant teacher who helped with these things got it brailled for me. So I had all the lesson plans, everything that was supposed to happen in the day. And she had a sub, she had a real teacher there. But I was responsible for doing that stuff. Now, I don't know. She didn't ask me if I wanted to do it. She told me I was going to do that. And so, she was sending me a message. And so that kind of thing was a grand and fun and hard and interesting thing to do, but it was fun. I sort of got a kick out of it. And so she was, in a certain way, planting a seed. And so I was just very lucky to have several of these kind of people. Now, of course, I had teachers who on my report cards in those first years, some of them said, shows great leadership ability, while some of them said, she's bossy and she talks too much. So and actually both of those people were women, which is fascinating, tells you something. So that kind of thing, the kinds of early experiences that one has are really, really pretty important to this whole development. And I was actually going to say, when we talk about how did you get to where you are, which is a question that people ask me. I guess when you reach a certain age, people think they can ask you that question. And one of the most important things to say is not by myself. Because as I've already now just said, there were a whole lot of people that were involved in that. So then I think about what are some of the kinds of characteristics that help one to become, quote unquote, a leader, or help one to keep moving forward. And one of them, I think, is just the willingness to take opportunities, whatever the opportunities might be that come along, your willingness to do it, to take risks. And I took a risk in a way, and I guess so did my parents. They sent me to college, they sent me to Oberlin College, which was a very, in theory, you were supposed to be smart to go there. And so I did go there, and it was a risk, and it was a big challenge because the high school I had been at was actually a school for the blind, and although it was all right, it really, in a certain way, didn't challenge. And all of a sudden, when I got to this place, as a lot of people I think have experienced, it was a small school, but for me it was a huge pond, and all the other fish in the pond were really, really smart. And so that was something to learn to deal with. I wasn't, the top dog anymore, excuse me, Ginger. I was going to have to learn to figure out what's that going to mean. I remember taking a German class my freshman year, and of course, I had a crush on the professor, right? And I loved German. I had, I sang German lieder. I just liked the language and all that sort of thing. So I took the class, and we were assigned this one paper, and I thought it was really, I was going to do a fabulous job on this paper, and boy, this was going to be great. Well, I got an F. I got my first F on that paper, and I found out why. And that was, of course, really unexpected and really, really hard to deal with. And I had to figure out why, and I learned why. And then I said, you could have had a choice at that point. You could have dropped the course. This is too hard, I don't know. But I did keep going, and I did end up, by the end of the semester, getting a B in that class. And just because, so the whole ability to bounce back, the fact that you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to fall on your Kazatskas, as my dad used to say. It's going to happen, and I think it's going to happen in school, where we all were at one point, but I think it might happen at work too. I don't, this is, I think we have to be willing to be learners all along the way, and that it's okay to have a mistake and it's okay to learn from it. So that kind of thing was a very, very important thing for me. So I went through school and I started off as a psych major, but I decided, partly because I was ornery, I think. My mom really thought I should be a psychologist. I should be a counseling psychologist. And I could sit in an office and listen to people, one at a time. And and I'd be really good at it. She said, "You're really good at that stuff." But I decided I wanted to be a teacher. And so I worked on that. And in fact, I did manage to get my certification to be an English teacher. That's what I did for my first career, and it was a huge challenge. I was teaching junior high school and high school English out in California in the public schools in a small town. And if you don't think kids didn't try hard to do little things like throw airplanes at me while it was going on, so that was a challenging thing. Now I did have every so often I would really knock one for my team. Like I have, just to tell a fun story, I think it's a fun story. I was teaching a science fiction English class, and I had just a tiniest bit of vision in my right eye at that time. And so you could see the occasional shadow and whatever, just a little bit. And so we were doing a class one day, and we were discussing the chapter, and I thought I picked up the shadow of this guy, and of course I didn't know who he was or anything, but I thought, he's trying to walk out the door over here. So I just reached out my hand, and luckily I just grabbed his hair and he's like, "Oh shit." So that was very cool. And score one for our team, right? That was what I thought. So I did teach like that for 3.5 whatever years. But at a certain point, I thought, if that's how you're going to continue, then you're going to have a lot of struggle in this. And is this really what you want to do, to have this much stress and etc. So did I know? Did I not know? But I admitted to myself that maybe this wasn't quite the field for me. And yet, one thing I want to say, and I know this all sounds a little bit scattered, but the point is, even if you do something like that, teaching of English, which I did for 3.5 years, and then I moved to other things, still, there were skills I got from that have stood me really in good stead. If you are in front of 30 kids for 6 hours every day, you're a little bit more relaxed about being in front of people than you otherwise might be. So the point is, you can take something from almost everything. And everything, as you go through work and development and figuring out what it is you want to do and becoming more skilled, somehow so many of those things that were in your experience, or things even that were annoying or horrible or even hurtful, you find ways to use them. And so that's been a very important lesson for me. So I got my tenure as a teacher, and then I quit. I had an opportunity in about 1974 to go to Europe to attend something called a convention of the International Federation of the Blind, which I hadn't heard of before. Because I was always, I'm going to be with everybody else. I don't have to do something special for people who are blind or disabled or blah, blah, blah. I'm going to be, teaching everybody. My God, I'm going to do that. Well, so at the end of that, when I did get my tenure and I did decide to maybe look at something else, even though I didn't know what it was, I went to Europe to this convention. And I will say also, speaking of taking risks, I went by myself. I didn't have a dog. I just traveled with a cane. And I went to the convention, and I also stayed with a friend for the week or so after the convention. And then I just figured, this was at that time you could get a 6-week excursion ticket, right? So I just figured I'll find people to stay with after that. I mean, when I think about that now, I'm like, oh, were you wacko? but that was 1974, and heck, you're 20-something and you can do anything. So that's what I did. And so that's another thing about the risk and doing things that seem, maybe they were crazy. But what did I learn there? I learned, first of all, that there were advocacy issues that had to do with people who are blind. What kind of education are people getting? What kind of employment opportunities are available? How much discrimination is there in terms of people who have disabilities or people who are blind? And that trip, I would say, was the beginning of my own consciousness kind of raising up and realize there's things to do here. And there's things to do to relate to really making better things happen for people with disabilities. And so that began to move me in a different direction. And one of the things that I learned when I was over there at the time was that there were a lot of students who were blind who were going only to segregated schools. There wasn't a place, typically, at that time, in public schools for kids who were blind and low vision. I decided I really would like to see if I could do something about that, and that is what landed me eventually into a teacher education training program, so that I could learn how to teach teachers and maybe encourage people, even in Europe or wherever I might find a place to do it, to have blind and low vision kids be in public schools, be with other students. So that was the beginning of my work in the whole area of disability. And so a seed had been planted, and as we say, that was a really new career direction that I had. And there was a federally funded project during my time at Columbia Teachers College that I went to work for, because of course you do have to pay rent while you're doing all this nice graduate school work, right? So then it was a project for helping colleges begin to accommodate students with disabilities, because that was in the 70s, and it was right at the point where rehabilitation, full employment, full participation of people with disabilities was just, and I do mean just, sneaking its way into law. There was something called the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that made the statement that all federal entities, all entities that are receiving federal funds had to be accessible to people with disabilities. And that, for the first time, that was the law. But for a very long time, no regulations were published that would give that law teeth and would make it reality. And in 1977, which was right about when I was starting to work in this area, a bunch of people with disabilities visited the office of Carter's then Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, and basically sat down in his office until Several days later, he finally signed the regs, and we finally got it. So those guys took a cue from their own, their heroes, which I would say, from the civil rights struggle of the 60s. They just came and sat down and said, this is our struggle. And we need to, we need to begin to work on this. So I was very inspired by that, and I knew that in some way or other, I had to be part of that work, part of the work that really moves people with disabilities into a situation of being wholly participatory in the society. And at about that time, I was asked to go down to a place called Baruch College, just down the street a ways from here, because they were starting to fool around with teaching blind people to use computers. And I'm like, what do I know about computers? I'm a lonely English teacher. I know nothing from this. So I went down to visit because it was intriguing, and plus I was told to do it. And what did I learn? I learned what a computer potentially is. Computer is something where at root, at the core, it's based on zeros and ones, right? And given that you can change the output on the screen, it doesn't have to be print. Maybe it could be Braille. Maybe it could be speech. Maybe it could be enlarged print. And that's what these people were beginning to work on. And what I realized is that we had always talked about the print barrier, which was always the challenge for people with vision loss. But here was the potential to crash it. And that changed my career. That I decided that it made even sense for me, the little English teacher, to become a part of that. And they were teaching a class that summer, and they were offering it to people who were blind, see if they could teach Fortran. Anybody remember Fortran? Yeah. But all the young people don't remember it anymore. Isn't that wonderful? This is an old, I could say dinosaur, but anyways, it's an old programming language, and they were going to try to see if they could teach it to blind people using a method that was called structured sentences at that point, rather than flowcharts. In other words, you create the picture you want to happen, you create it with words, and not with the actual chart. So they were going to teach these classes, and I said, you know what, I don't have any money, but I'm in teacher education, so maybe I can take your class for free, and maybe I can give you tips on teaching. And so they decided that was a useful idea, silly, deluded people that they were. So I got to take that class. And I learned two things from that. The first thing I learned was that I never in my life would be a programmer. And the second thing was that this really was a whole new path to literacy for people who were blind and low vision. And that the computer was going to be the way that people could be equalized, if we can say. If people could become really fluent and learn this and begin to use it, they would have a new place in society, in the world, in terms of their jobs. And that was really what it came to. So my work since that time has really been about, first of all, making sure, as Meredith indicated, that people got training as much as possible, and that's still a need today. It's a critical need today. Everything has changed, of course, and we have much more possibility for this today. But that was a critical piece. But the other piece has to do with how people with disabilities are seen by everybody else. Again, how we see each other. We We work with that in terms of race. We work with it in terms of gender. We also need to work with it in terms of disability. How easy is it, if you really think about it, how able are you to see people with disabilities as full employees who could be partners with you right here in this bank? And that is as critical as the training that people get. And so that has been, along with all of the work to push, if you will, technologists to take accessibility into account as they are creating things, including websites. How accessible is your website? When somebody is using what we call a screen reader, which is the speech system that reads what's on the screen, if I go to your website, how many graphics am I going to run into that just say graphic, 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 because nobody's put in what's called an alt tag, which reads whatever the letters are that are in the graphic. So web accessibility is huge, and that is now also a matter of law if you happen to be anybody that receives federal funding. So that whole thing is critical, and we try to work with individual companies and individual groups that are working in tech and working on their own websites, and just try to help them make sure that they have something that's really accessible to people and usable by people. But we also work on attitudes and just people becoming more open to understanding that people with disabilities and people without disabilities, at least for the time being, can work together and can partner. This past weekend, I led a retreat, and we had about 60 people there, and our keynoter was a really, really high-powered individual who's got, she's got about 10 jobs. She's a CEO of about 4 or 5 different organizations, and she's very involved with work in the church nationally. And she had injured her knee when she walked in on the Friday night before she was to do all her keynotes and all that kind of thing. And we were at dinner with everybody, and she was saying, "Oh my God, I can't sit down," she said, "for my talk." She said, because people are, the audience doesn't want to look at somebody sitting. I mean, they'll think I'm nothing. I got nothing. I said, "Excuse me, if you need to sit down, that's an accommodation. For the time being, you have a temporary disability, and you absolutely are entitled to do that, and the audience will get over it." And that's in fact what happened. She was a huge hit, and when she wrote a thank you note, she actually used the word that she was temporarily impaired. And now impaired might not be the word I would use, but I think what it's saying is she got it. She realized that it was okay to do things a little bit differently so that you are supported and you can best do the job that you came to do. It does not make you less than. It makes you part of, and that's what you bring. And as women, we're learning that, we're saying that, and as men who support us, we're thrilled for that. I ask you all to open ourselves up so that disability becomes a part of that mix. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. That was wonderful. Does anyone have any questions for Karen? Just speak up.
Yeah, loud.
Anyone?
Karen, it's Rich.
Yeah.
You mentioned Julie Jansen. She did some unconscious bias training for a group of us, and I think she said that blind people were the most discriminated against group in the world, which was interesting to me.
We have a 70% unemployment rate in this country.
Right, and I love to say is, I'm embarrassed to say, I think through the history of this branch, Meredith will help me out here, I would be confident in saying a 45-year history, we've never had a blind person, is that right?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, and so you talk a lot of, this is supposed to be inspirational, it certainly hit that mark. I'll have to say, I sit here thinking mostly, you're trying to tell us to look at people with disabilities as equals and as capable, and I get that, and yet my mind still goes to, I'm so in awe and amazed that you were able to come to our office by yourself, because we're just trying to work that out in our minds. So how do we get over that thinking about the disability and looking at the person?
I think it's practice.
Yeah, okay.
I think there were studies, and I can't pull them up now, but when there were issues around integration in housing in a racial sense, there were studies that found that when people actually lived together and they shared in an apartment building and they shared a laundry room, or they saw each other in the hallway or whatever, they tended to become fine with each other, little by little, over time. I don't know, how does that sound to people here? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what, and then also, there's truth in advertising. How did I come here by myself? Well, Meredith was very kind to send a driver. So I walked out of my house, and I had told her in advance. I had told her, or Anita, anyways, I had said, tell that driver to make sure he talks to me. Because otherwise I'm going to be looking for him, and I'm Anthony, I'm your guy. Good, great. I'm going to let the dog make a contribution to the street, and then I'm going to come get right in your car. Because I'd rather not have her doing that in your car, if you know what I'm saying. So that's one answer, and then well, it's two answers, because one is time, the other is learning how it works, learning what you do, learning that, for example, when somebody's working a guide dog, or when the guide dog is in harness, you don't pet the dog, you just learn that, and you don't really do much in terms of eye contact either, because that's a distraction to the dog. So learning these little bits and pieces, don't tell somebody, oh, here, it's right over there. That's not so helpful, if you know what I'm saying. So, so I think those little things, and also I would say, if you're beginning this journey and you have some people you're working with, a little humor helps, and not taking it all so seriously, but the serious thing is opening the place up to this kind of accessibility, attitudinal accessibility, we could call it. So does that help a little bit?
Yeah, great, thanks.
Any other comments or questions for Karen? Okay. Well, again, please join me in thanking Karen for her time. Thank you, Karen. That was wonderful. Thank you. Straight ahead is that chair that you're sitting in. Thanks, everyone. And thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Anita, for her help.
Yes, thank you very much.